Okay, a bunch of cards got spoiled for Modern Horizons 3 today. I decided to make a series of smaller videos talking about cards as they get spoiled instead of one long video like I usually do, because that video would just be way too long. Out of all the cards spoiled so far, the only one that has me really stunned, like shocked that they're printing this into Modern, is Ugan's Labyrinth. This is a land that normally taps for a colorless, but when it enters the battlefield, you can exile a card with a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand, and if you do that, it taps for 2 colorless instead of 1, and you can tap it and return that exiled card to your hand, so you can cast it in the late game. Um, Kind of like very simply put, there are not many lands in Magic that can tap for 2 mana, especially on turn 1. Um, and there's never been one legal in Modern before that can tap for 2 unconditional mana. We've previously had Eldrazi Temple be a big player in Modern. This can tap for 2 mana for only Eldrazi spells. Ugan's Labyrinth can tap for mana of colorless mana that you can do on anything. You can use this to make Urza Saga tokens. This is actually, I think, going to be pretty common to go turn 1 Urza Saga into turn 2 Ugan's Labyrinth and just tap it, make a construct token. You can cast Chalice of the Void on turn 1. You can do anything with this card, really, as long as that you're meeting the requirement of having a big colorless card to exile from your hand. This restriction, of course, is going to be kind of restrictive, right? Like, you're only going to be able to play this in like Eldrazi Tron style shells, Affinity. But the thing is, they're also printing lots of good Eldrazi to imprint to this. They're printing like Emrakul, the World Anew, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're printing Null Drifter, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there's a lot more things to print to this. You can print Sign of Draco. You can play Affinity and play this Urza Saga style shell we're talking about, where you imprint Sojourner's Companion, imprint Mirror Enforcer. It's going to be a bit easier to meet this card's restriction when you play it, when you build around it. And what has me kind of like shocked is like the card just doesn't have a downside like Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. City of Traders, you play another land, you sacrifice it. Ancient Tomb deals 2 damage to you. If you don't meet Ugan's Labyrinth restriction of like imprinting a card, it's just a land that enters untapped and taps for a colorless mana unconditionally. So like this is a really crazy card. Like, they've banned Mox Opal, they banned Simian Spirit Guide. It really seemed like Wizards was very hesitant to give you access to 2 mana on turn 1. And obviously you have to jump through some hoops here, and we'll see how effective it is. But to me, this card feels like it's going to be a really big player in Modern. That being said, this is a format with cards like Obsidian Charmaw, Break the Ice, Blood Moon, Field of Ruin plus Sunken Citadel. Like, there are a lot of ways to fight colorless mana strategies, especially Obsidian Charmaw. That card is really good against decks like this. There's also like Void Mirror. So I don't think I'm that worried overall for like this card just destroying Modern, but I'm just shocked that they printed a land that taps for 2 mana, and it's going to be very fun to build around, and it's going to be very fun to blow them up with Obsidian Charmaws, I guess. Circling back to Emrakul, the World Anew, this was a card that was actually spoiled a couple months ago at MagicCon Chicago. I never ended up making any YouTube content talking about those cards, so I'm just going to be lumping them together with today's spoilers in this video. And I think that this is the first card I'll build around with Ugan's Labyrinth, and I expect this card to be very good in Modern. I expect Emrakul, the World Anew, to be a very good Modern card. We'll see, but this is my initial impression. So this is a 12 mana 12/12. Whenever you cast a spell and gain control of all creatures target player controls, which is a crazy ability. It also has flying and protection from spells and permanents that were cast this turn, which means that it's immune to like removal spells, like a Terminate. It can't be Solituded, it can't be Leyline Binding like the 15 mana Emrakul can be. But if your opponent played like a Teferi Time Raveler and then plussed it and then bounced it, that would deal with Emrakul. Teferi actually seems like Emrakul's number one defeater. I don't know, because not only is Teferi able to bounce an Emrakul in some situations, but it also stops the madness cost from being paid. When Emrakul leaves the battlefield, you sacrifice all creatures you control. So if you are able to get rid of your opponent's Emrakul, all of the creatures that were stolen are going to be sacrificed, which is kind of wild. And you can discount the 12 mana casting cost by 6 if you madness it, if you discard Emrakul, the World Anew. I think the main way to do that in a colorless shell, which is going to be all the shells because this costs 6 colorless mana. The main way to do this is going to be with the Underworld Cookbook. Maybe you search this off of Urza Saga. Maybe you can also play Asmo in this shell too. But being able to in theory go turn 1 Eldrazi Temple, turn 2 and play Cookbook, and then play another temple and Ugan's Labyrinth. You can just cast this card on turn 3. You can just cast this card on turn 3, and it'll be really, really powerful. Usually it's not going to be until turn 4, maybe turn 5 that you cast this card, but if you can build a deck that can just buy a little time with cards like the One Ring that you can cast on turn 3 with Ugan's Labyrinth, this card is going to mostly translate to be 6 mana win the game, and it's 6 mana that you can sink Eldrazi Temple mana into, which is just, I think, pretty exciting. Flare of Denial seems like a card that people have pretty normal, reasonable opinions about. It is another 0 mana counter spell, which are always super popular. Very similar to Force of Negation. It's a 3 mana counter spell. For a blue, and 1, you can spend 3 mana and counter target spell. So the same text as cancel, with a small upside of being able to sacrifice a non-token blue creature rather than play the spell's mana cost. So, like Force of Negation, 0 mana counter spell for 3 mana, unlike Force of Negation, can counter any spell, which is huge. most modern decks play spells in them. And also, unlike Force of Negation, you can play it for 0 mana on your turn and potentially stop your opponent from doing something to mess with your stuff on your turn. Sacrificing a non-token blue creature is a big cost. It's not going to be something that you can do super easily. It's not going to be something you can do in like traditional counterspell decks like Blue-White Control or Murktide, which is something I really like about this card. I really like that this is not a card that just slots into the existing 2 de facto counterspell decks. That being said, there are lots of good blue creatures to sacrifice to Flare of Denial. The top 4 I have here are like going to be Silvergill Adepts, but like to a bigger extent, just like the entire Merfolk deck is kind of interested, I think, in playing Flare of Denial. Flahi Archaeologist seems awesome to sack. Watcher for Tomorrow seems awesome to sack. Snapcaster Mage seems awesome to sack. Just a small note, you can't target Flare of Denial and then alternate cast it in the same way you can't do that with Force of Negation, but still some good synergy here. And finding a shell that Flare of Denial fits into outside of like just Merfolk, or maybe just like outside of like a wizard shell is gonna be kind of interesting. That being said, I think this card is incredibly powerful. This card is incredibly powerful, incredibly good, and but also has like interesting deck building hurdles to jump through, which is that is usually the sweet spot for what I like. Incredibly powerful, incredibly good, but you have to jump through some hurdles for it. That being said, just kind of on a personal level, my hype is not. I'm not super hyped for this card because I was really hoping the blue flare would do something besides counter a spell, like Subtlety interacts with spells on the stack, Force of Negation interacts with spells on the stack. I was kind of hoping the blue pitch card in this set would do something else, but it doesn't, and it is what it is. So I think at the moment I think this card is very, very good, but a lot of my evaluation of it right now, or like my feelings about the card, is I'm just kind of feeling deflated because I was hoping for something like cool and interesting and blue. I think after that feeling of deflation leaves, I may start to think that this card is just crazy, crazy powerful good. We'll see. I need to start building some decks with it, but it is likely going to see a lot of play in Modern. The other flare that's been spoiled is Flare of Cultivation. It was spoiled a few months ago. Don't want to spend too much time on it. This is kind of the same theme as Flare of Denial. 3 mana card that exists, cancel. A 3 mana card that exists that you can play 0 mana for if you sacrifice a non-token on-color creature. So this is Cultivate, normal 3 mana card, 0 mana. You sacrifice a non-token green creature. We have gone, it seems, from a format where they've banned Simian Spirit Guide, they've banned Mox Opal, and they're pretty unwilling to give us fast mana, like free fast mana. You have Mox Amber, that card's kind of mediocre, but there's very few of these kind of effects. Now we have Ugan's Labyrinth, and we also have Flare of Cultivation, a 0 mana spell that puts a land into play. Which is very powerful. The obvious most powerful thing you can do with this card, I think, is to play a turn 1 Arboreal Grazer, put a land into play, sacrifice it to Flare of Cultivation, put a land into play, put another land into your hand for next turn, play that land and cast like a 1 ring on turn 2, or you got 4 mana. You'll figure it out. Uh, Thinking a little bit beyond this, I think that it's like maybe possible to play like 8 Grazer effects. Obviously, Grazer puts any land into play. Elvish Pioneer does not do that. It only puts basic lands into play, but it is also likely if you're playing Flare of Cultivation, you are like likely wanting to play a lot of basic lands. There's also another basic land payoff that we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's possible for you to play like mostly basic lands. I think you could have a mana base that's like 6 bounce lands, like 6 Simic Growth Chambers, less than the Sanctuaries, 20 Forest, 4 Grazer, 4 Elvish Pioneer to like make use of Flare of Cultivation. Also really nice with Young Wolf, just 1 mana, sack it, Undying, you have a 2/2. And then you could also, even if you have 2 Flare of Cultivations, you could just sack your Young Wolf to both of them and then have 5 mana. Or sorry, 4 mana turn 2 because you didn't Grazer put something into play. Sonoti Scout's also maybe a card you play in these kind of shells sometimes. This would be maybe more so if you have like a non-Yawgmoth Young Wolf deck that like cares about creatures with counters because of Agathos's Soul Cauldron. Probably not. But you could also maybe play Flare of Cultivation in Yawgmoth. Some people say you don't want to have non-creature accelerants in Yawgmoth because you need creatures in play to sack to Yawg. This is a good statement. Some people say 0 mana Cultivate is broken. 0 mana spells are broken. 0 mana spells that in a deck that is casting 4-drops is good. I'm kind of on that side of the camp, but we'll see. I at the very least, I think this card is very good. And like one thing I think that is going to be very easy to miss, right? When we're talking about the flares, and this is both for Flare of Denial and Flare of Cultivation, is that these cards are very hard castable. Obviously, you're not loving casting Cultivate in Modern. You don't love to cast Cancel in Modern, but these are way more hard castable than like Solitude or Fury or Subtlety. It's like 3 mana is just pretty easy. So expect both of these to see a lot of play, and then wait with eager anticipation for the Mardu ones. And that basic land payoff I was kind of mentioning with Flare of Cultivation, Elvish Pioneer, like this build that plays just tons of basic lands, is Winter Moon. Players cannot untap more than 1 non-basic land during their untap step. And it's also kind of cool that if you did build this mana base that's like 6 bounce lands, 20 basic forest, you just untap your 1 bounce land every turn, and there's really not, it's only a problem if you have 2 bounce lands in play. This card reads kind of crazy to me. Players cannot untap more than 1 non-basic land during the untap steps. The art is also something of all the art spoiled so far, I just really like the look of this one. This card is very good. It has very high deck building restriction, which, talking about card design too, like that is like where you want to be, I think, for these cards. Very powerful, high deck building restriction. You need to have, figuring out the right shelf for these cards just takes a lot of time, and it's what I love. And I kind of just like love cards like this. A lot of these are like scary for like maybe the health of Modern, but I think this card is very good. I'm excited to play it in this kind of shell. One thing I really don't like about this card is that it's like a land hate card that isn't good against Amulet Titan. I really just wish. One thing I think that would make Modern better if there was just like another really effective card against Amulet Titan. Just kind of like me musing a little bit, but that's one thing I don't like about it, is that it doesn't really seem to do too much against them. Ajani Nikado Pariah is a card that I think will be pretty good in Modern. This is a 2 mana 1/2 that enters the battlefield, makes a 2/1 cat creature token. That is 3 power, 3 toughness over 2 bodies, can be flickered for value to make more tokens. That is pretty good. And then when either 1 or more other cats you control die, you get to turn Johnny into a pretty good planeswalker. The 0 ability makes another cat creature token, and then it's so weird. If you control another red permanent, so Ragavan or whatever, it deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to any target. This is potentially very good for a 0 mana ability. It is just like very weirdly coded towards having a red permanent. I've been kind of thinking like maybe you play this with Goblin Bombardment, because that's a red permanent, and it also lets you sacrifice a cat to turn Johnny into a creature. You can also +2 to put a counter on each cat you control. This likely won't come up that often outside of just putting counters on the cat tokens you're making with the 0 ability, but Wild Nikado and the Shoba Brawler see some play at least. And then the -4 is like this one-sided tragic arrogance, where each opponent chooses an artifact, creature, enchantment, and planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, and then sacrifice the rest. it's kind of nice that this is like a board stall breaker, but it's also kind of true in modern board states. Just don't get that clogged that often. They don't get that big that often due to how efficient the interaction is. But the way I'm looking at it, Johnny, is you get a good amount of value on the front end, and then you get on the backside what would be like maybe a 3 or 4 mana planeswalker in standard, like a kind of mediocre 3 or 4 mana planeswalker. But the fact that you're getting this for like 2 mana, potentially, plus like good front side, plus some potential flicker value with cards like this, I like it. I also like that this puts 2 different powers into play for Collector's Cage, which is a new card that is showing a lot of promise in Modern. Johnny seems like it'll be very good in Collector's Cage decks, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about this card here. Thalia, Exuberant Shepherd, is potentially the most efficient creature-based flicker effect in Magic's history. There may be some like obscure legacy creature I'm not thinking of. If there is one, maybe comment in the comment section below. But this is kind of like a 2 mana Soul Herder with just a better text box than Soul Herder's 3 mana 3 mana text box. It's a 2/2 instead of a 1/1, so not as weak to Orcish Bowmasters, which is huge. It has Flash, which is really, really nice. Just being able to hold this up, and then either your opponent like holds up removal, or they do nothing on their turn, which is really nice. And so you get to flash it on your opponent's end of turn, and whenever it attacks, you get to exile up to one other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, you return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on this. So like Soul Herder, it gets bigger. Like Soul Herder, it flickers one thing a turn. Unlike Soul Herder, it can flicker your opponent's stuff, which is actually going to be, I think, more relevant interaction than you might expect. You can get rid of any token, most relevantly Construct tokens, but also like Orc Army tokens and stuff, just attack, delete those from existence. If your opponent played an 8/8 Murktide, that 8/8 Murktide is now a 3/3 Murktide that comes back on the end step. And you can reset your opponent's One Rings. The list kind of goes on and on and on. There's going to be lots of good cards to flicker, like a Johnny Nakata Pariah, like Wall of Omens, but I'm also really excited to flicker any non-land permanent. So not just creatures like Soul Herder. This can flicker any non-land permanent. And like I kind of mentioned, talking about a Johnny, Collector's Cage is going to be a really good card to flicker. You just cast something for free, flicker it, cast something else for free. I kind of expect this card, a Johnny in Collector's Cage, maybe with Mox Amber, because these are both legends, to be a deck of some kind. I've been exploring like mono white Collector's Cage with Windbrisk Heights to cast Emeralds and stuff. Maybe because you can reset Collector's Cage with this card so often, maybe you just kind of tone it down a little bit. Not sure, but I expect this card to be very good. A lot of these cards that were spoiled a couple months ago in MagicCon Chicago have like really relevant patch updates since I haven't talked about them. Like Flare of Cultivation, I found Elvish Pioneer for it before making the video. A Johnny like this is I think more relevant because of Thalia. There's a lot of like patch updates to my earliest impression on these cards, and one big update to my impression on Psychic Frog is that Toro the Infiltrator is a really good 2 mana blue black card advantage creature. And I've been playing some of these decks, and I've been really feeling like I would love some redundancy in this effect. So some more 2 mana blue black card advantage creature. We're getting one with Psychic Frog. This is a 2 mana 1/2. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you draw a card. Awesome. You can discard a card and put a counter on Psychic Frog. This means that if you play this card on turn 2, it's not going to really die to Lightning Bolt or Unholy Heat very often. If they heat it, you're just going to get it to 2/3. If they bolt it, you'll be okay. Like Force of Willing that to turn this into a 3/4, untap and draw a card with it. It's also really cool that this ability, discard, put a counter, is something you can use with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Lotlith Troll has a somewhat similar ability, discard a creature card, put a +1 counter. I've played that card in some Vengevine shells. This card is a lot better because it can discard any card and also generates card advantage. And you can also exile 3 cards from your graveyard to give it flying. This ability is also something you can use with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. It gives you a little bit of punch in the late game. Not super duper relevant, but very flavorful. And what I like about this card is that it seems like it'll be like kind of generically good in blue-black decks. you can play it in addition to Satoro to have like, Satoro will be kind of doing its thing with like Ephemerate, Solitude, Grief, this kind of stuff, but you have some redundancy in the 2-drop slot. And then you could also play it in like weird Cauldron graveyard decks. You can also play Satoro in some of these decks too, since you like bring back Bloodghast to enjoy and draw cards. Very excited for Psychic Frog. I think this card is just also kind of simply put going to be one of the best 2-mana creatures in Modern. One of the former best 2-mana creatures in Modern has become a 1-mana creature in Modern. Nether Go. It's a Lurgoyf, and it has the same ability as Tarmogoyf, except it's not symmetrical. It only counts your own graveyard. Power equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, and toughness equal to the number +1. Tarmogoyf also counts your opponent's graveyard. This only counts your graveyard. Differences are that it's black, and it only costs 1 mana. If you don't play a lot of Modern, you don't brew a lot of Modern, I really cannot stress to you how important it is or how good it is for your threats to be 1 mana instead of 2. It's half the mana cost. Getting on the board on turn 1 is super duper important. And for a really long time, I had felt like there just was not a good 1 mana black creature in Modern. A lot of people will be like, what about Death Shadow? But Death Shadow is just not a card you can cast on turn 1. We recently got Stackolite Stalker, which is okay. I played Stalker in some decks. Stalker is fine. We also have some other black 1-drops like Carrion Feeder, Stitcher Supplier, but these are like combo cards. These are like synergy linear cards. What I meant by we don't have like a generically good black 1-drop. That you could just put in a mid-range deck, like red just gets Ragavan and Dragon Range's Chandler, and white has Esper Sentinel. There's just like no good. This is a good card for 1 mana in black. Another Goyf, I think, is likely going to be that card. It's going to be like basically any black shell is going to have the discard available to enable this card. I think it's also going to be very likely whatever like black mid-range deck you're playing could be kind of easy to put in. Mishra's Bauble, I don't know. This Mishra's Bauble is good with everything. This card also has Escape. The escape cost is kind of steep. I like the design on the Escape a lot here, where it's 3 mana and then you have to exile 4 different cards with different types to cast this. So pretty steep, not going to be escaping this on turn 3 very often, but will give you some flood insurance in the late game, which I think is really nice. I kind of simply put, I think Nether Goyf is better than Tarmogoyf. It'll be a little smaller, but for half the mana cost with the ability to come back. Also, it's in a better color since like Nether Goyf, when you're playing Tarmogoyf, you basically always want to pair it with black cards, since discard spell into Tarmogoyf makes it big really fast. You can pair with blue cards, I think, to less success. But this allows Nether Goyf to be in like just red black instead of Jund, or you could be mono black instead of red black or Jund. That being said, you can also play both Nether Goyf and Tarmogoyf together. No one said that you have to play one over the other. I think there's a chance you end up playing both, but Tarmogoyf is no longer the best Lurgoyf in Magic. All hail Nether Goyf. Okay, 2 more Eldrazi. Null Drifter, very notable about any colorless card that has mana value 7 or greater, imprints to Ugan's Labyrinth. I also love this card. It is a Eldrazi-fied Mold Drifter. For 3 mana, you can evoke it, and whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards. So notable difference to Mold Drifter. If it's counterspelled, you still draw 2 cards, but if you were to like Ephemerate a Null Drifter, if you were going to Undying Evil it, if you were going to persist it, you're not going to get to draw 2 cards, which I love about the design of this card. I think they did a great job with this one. I also kind of wanted to talk about it with It That Heralds the End, since this says colorless spells with mana value 7 or greater cost 1 less. You can, if you have It That Heralds the End in play, you can evoke Null Drifter for 2 mana, but it's a blue and 1, so you can't tap Eldrazi Temple or Ugan's Playhouse to evoke it, which I just kind of love everything about Null Drifter in the context of Modern. Can't ephemerate it for value, can't persist it for value. It's not a strictly better Null Drifter, and it does work with Eldrazi Temple to evoke for 2 mana. It works with this to evoke for 2 mana, but not just for 1 land tap, which good job on this card. It also is a 4/4 flyer with Annihilator 1, so you're in the early game it's going to cycle for 2. It's going to imprint to your Ugan's Labyrinth, and then in the late game or turn 4, it's going to be a 4 mana, or it's going to be a 4/4 flyer that you tapped 4 lands for that has Annihilator 1 and you drew 2 cards. This card is going to be good, I think. We also have a pair of Eldrazi I think are going to be kind of bad, probably. We have Harrogast, Erupting Nullkite, Eldrazi Dragon, very cool, makes me want to be a commander player. 9 mana or 6 red emerge, which this emerge is discounted if you sacrifice a creature with lesser mana value. So if you sack a Matter Reshaper, this card costs 5 Eldrazi mana. Whenever you cast a spell, you can exile your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. It also has flying, and it gives each other creature spell emerge equal to its mana cost. So you could potentially cast this, and then if you have 1 more mana, you can cast an Ulamog by sacking this. I'm pretty sure this would let you emerge off of this. At the moment, I don't think this is going to be like the way to build an Eldrazi deck. You know what I mean? Like in my mind, I'm kind of envisioning playing Null Drifter, maybe that heralds the end, the big Emrakul, maybe 13 mana Emrakul, probably not 13 mana Emrakul. I don't know. This isn't exactly my vision at the moment. I'm gonna have to wait and see what the rest of the Eldrazi are. But at the very least, this card is pretty sick, and maybe the new like Pitches to Grief, Pitches to Solitude is the new imprints to Ugan's Labyrinth. I don't know. Maybe just imprinting to Ugan's Labyrinth is good enough. There's also Spawn Gang Commander, so an Eldrazi-fied Sling Gang Commander, which is pretty cool. Makes 3 spawn tokens, not scion tokens, that are 1/1s, 0/1s that can sack for a colorless. You can spin a colorless in 1, sacrifice any Eldrazi, deal 2 damage to any target. Pretty cool card. Unlikely to be constructed playable, likely going to be a menace in draft though. Another card that I just love is Null Elemental Blast. It is simple, it's iconic. For 1 colorless mana, you can choose 1, counter target multicolored spell or destroy target multicolored permanent. So you call back to red Elemental Blast, blue Elemental Blast, Hydroblast, Pyroblast. And I think this card's also pretty balanced. I think it's not going to see a ton of play. It won't ever really be main deckable, but you can side it in against like Leyline Scion decks. It kills Leyline, it kills Kavu, it kills. Maybe if you're playing like an Emrakul Madness deck, you can board in Null Elemental Blast to kill your opponents Teferi Time Ravelers that are stopping your madness, but I have a hard time imagining you're often going to play too many of these cards in your sideboard. I'm going to have a hard time imagining that they're ever going to be like too powerful too. Great job with this one. Other card I really like is White of the Reliquary, a zombified Knight of the Reliquary. 2 mana, 2/2 vigilance, +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. So it can be pretty big, pretty fast if you have like some Citrus Supplier Street Wraiths. And it has a cauldronable ability. Creatures, of course, with activated abilities in Modern always have to be evaluated in the context of Agatha's Soul Cauldron, where you can sacrifice another creature and search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. I really like that this is acceleration instead of like, kind of like mana parity with Knight of the Reliquary. You sack a land to get a land. This you sack like a Bloodghast or a Supplier and you're ramping. White of the Reliquary is likely going to be pretty slow and dirtily in a format where it's, you're presenting like you're going to be like maybe weak to graveyard hate. You're going to be maybe like just raised by Titan and Tron and stuff. But this card is cool. This card is powerful, and I like that it can get really big really fast. I love that it has vigilance so that you can have it big, attack, and then tap it post combat. You can actually tap it while you're in combat to grow it. Just kind of like the old Knight of the Reliquary, be able to do that on defense. This will probably not happen, but Cryptic Agadeem could be an awesome tutor target with White of the Reliquary. It's a card I've tried to build around a few times with Stitcher Supplier and Street Wraith and like the troll that gets swamps. Never found really any success with these brews. It's a land that enters the battlefield taps for black, and you can spend 2 mana, tap it, add a black mana in your pool for each creature card in your graveyard. So you have to have 4 black creatures in your yard before this even makes 1 extra mana. But I really like Cryptic Agadeem, and if White of the Reliquary can't power up Cryptic Agadeem, nothing can. But I think it will likely be better. So maybe you're searching up just Urborg Cabal Coffers instead. That's likely going to be a bit better. But I like this card. I played some like zombie cauldron shells to like pretty solid success, and like I feel like this card would slot right into those shells. But I also feel like that strategy is unlikely to be super good in MH3 metagame unless the Black Flare is really good. The latest piece of Urza's real estate portfolio is Urza's Cave. Tap for a colorless mana, or spend 3 mana, tap and sacrifice it to search your library for any land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Love that the activated ability can be discounted with Sunken Citadel. And this card is just very good. I think it makes a lot of sense in colorless Tron decks that aren't playing Sylvan Scrying and Ancient Stirring, so that you can have some redundancy to Expedition Map to tutor up your missing Tron pieces. Putting a Lotus Field into play and like untapping with Amulet, giving some redundancy there, and like Twiddle Storm, I think makes a lot of sense, and I think will likely be pretty good there. I imagine Amulet Titan will likely find some good use for some copies of Urza's Cave too. Very good toolbox card, very good utility card. There are definitely tons and tons of good colorless utility lands in Modern and Magic in general, and this is not only one of them, but it's the one that finds all of them. We also have a really cool take on Recurring Nightmare. The art is also like super reminiscent of Recurring Nightmare with all the eyes and the walls here. I really like this card. It feels like in a lot of ways like the Modern Horizon sets are kind of just like love letters to the game. With this card, enters the battlefield, it makes 3 energy, making it, I think, the first modern legal energy card since the Kaladesh sets. And you can pay X energy to sacrifice a creature and return this nightmare to your hand, kind of like Recurring Nightmare, and then return a creature card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So very similar to Recurring Nightmare, except it's one less mana, and you are restricted to what you can bring back via the amount of energy you make. I imagine that you are almost only ever going to have this card as an energy generator. Maybe you play like an Aether Hub in your deck or something, but it's like if you play this, you get 3 energy, you like sack a supplier, get back a supplier, then next time you play this, you'll have 5 energy, and then you can use that to bring back Grief maybe. But yeah, I think this card is going to be like a very fun build around. And you could maybe play it in a deck like this with White of the Reliquary. Supplier and Grief are likely going to be like very very critical pieces of glue to hold this kind of shell together. But at first glance, it seems like if you're going to build around this card, your deck is going to be really weak when you don't draw this card. When you kind of like in Cube when you draft a Recurring Nightmare deck and you just never find Recurring Nightmare. It's be weak when you don't draw this card, and when you do, you're still going to be like slow and weak to graveyard hate. So, not expecting this card to be great, but it is just like such a beautiful card. We also have Kudo, King Among Bears. Very, I like this card a lot too. It's a 2-mana 2/2. Other creatures have power and toughness 2/2 and are bears in addition to other types. This is kind of reminiscent of like older card design, but this does not affect only your creatures. It affects your opponent's creatures too. So I could see maybe playing this in like a Gleeful Demolition, Ornithopter, like Convoke style shell, where you are turning, you make a bunch of 1/1s and 0/2s, and you turn them into 2/2s and attack, and then all your opponent's stuff is small. That does not sound like something you should be doing in Modern. It sounds worse than like normal Convoke stuff, but very cool card. Very cool card. We'll likely see no Modern play. MH3 also has a bunch of cards that were not legal in Modern being printed into Modern for the first time. One that I'm really surprised to see, a card that I think is like really messed up, is Kappa Cannoneer. This is a 6-mana 4/4, but it has like the artifact Convoke Improvise. Your artifacts can help cast this spell, period. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. So you can tap like your Colossus Hammer, your Shadow Spears, and help pay for the 6-mana casting cost. The effect on this card is really crazy, especially when you consider that this card can just be like 1 mana, 5 artifacts, go crazy. It has Ward 4, so nearly hexproof, and whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under control, you put a counter on it, and it can't be blocked this turn. So it comes down as a 5/5 Ward 4, potentially for 1 mana, and every artifact you play after that makes it get bigger, and makes it unblockable, and it's almost impossible to kill. This card is crazy. This card is really, really, really good, and it's a card I've played with and against a little bit in Legacy, and always felt like it was pretty messed up. It also pitches to Force of Will, Force of Negation, Subtlety. Force of Will not relevant in this format, but maybe a little bit relevant in Modern. That being said, it's like it is kind of safe to print a card like this into Modern, right? Where this card is really good and really scary, but Affinity just cannot be just cannot be a tiered deck in Modern for longer than like a week or two. This is, a format with Meltdown, Pest Control, Force of Vigor, Engineered Explosives, Collector Oof, Beseiju, Karn the Great Creator, Primeval Titan. It's just, the list just goes on and on and on of like cards that just destroy Affinity strategies. Any color, any combination can just choose to beat these strategies if they want to, really. And I guess that's a good thing. I don't know. This card is very good. Affinity is unlikely to be a good deck, even in the context of this card, but we'll see what else we get. Another card that I've always kind of hoped they would print into Modern is Lila, the Blade Reforged. I've had like a lot of fun playing with this in Cube, and I kind of feel like, hey, yeah, this could probably be a Modern card. At the moment, I don't think it'll be very good. I think that in like most red decks, it's going to be worse than Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and you could maybe play both in the same strategy, but a lot of decks don't really want to play that many 3-drops anyways, and so like getting to play a lot of copies of this is going to be tough. Also, when this card was spoiled, a lot of people were excited about pairing it with Cascade cards, because every time you flip over something with Cascade, Layla gets a +1 counter. That was kind of interesting. They banned the best red Cascade spell, Violent Outburst. I guess you still have Bloodbraid Elf, but I don't know. I think this card will be pretty solid, but like it'll likely be like the third or fourth best red 3-drop, like behind maybe Blood Moon and Seasoned Pyromancer. And if you're the third or fourth best red 3-drop in Modern, you just kind of don't make the cut most of the time. And that's my current impression. Maybe there would be something like Violent Outburst that can make this card kind of big, but at the moment, low on the card. My pet deck, Elves, gets a big upgrade. I love Elves, and I've played a lot of it over the last couple of years. I think the deck is like a little bit underrated. I think it's doing a lot of pretty interesting, powerful stuff. It is also not very good. It also has the like affinity problem of, if Elves ever is good, there's like Plague Engineers and tons and tons of like stuff that just wrecks you as an Elves archetype. But I've played a lot of Elves, and like I've always just wished I could cut these stupid Elvish Archdruids for Priest of Titanias, where it's where you can like use your Tyvar to get back your big man engine. That's awesome. You can also like being able to chord for 2 instead of 3 for your mana engine just matters so much. It's just going to be like just being able to chord for a powerful mana engine, chord for 2 instead of 3. It matters so much. There've been so many games I've played where I've just been like, if I could get Priest of Titania, I'd win. I have to play Elvish Archdruid instead as this like, big mana engine, and it's just a little too slow. I also love that you have Quarian Ranger to untap Priest of Titania and make tons and tons of mana. And in fact, like the general engine is going to be like, get this online, either by like playing it turn 2, or after it dies on turn 2, getting it back with Tyvar, or cording for it on your end of your opponent's turn when they're not playing around it, and then using Quarian Rangers to untap your Priest of Titania, making tons and tons of mana, and using cards like Realm Walker and the Leaf Crown Visionary to like just draw your entire deck. I'm very excited about it. I do think there's a chance Elves has a place in the metagame, because like it is like pretty good against like these big colorless strategies usually. I think without another good elf card being printed, Elves is not very likely to do that. But maybe if we get something like a Wildwood Symbiote or a new elf card, hopefully a new elf card, maybe. But again, like Affinity, these are the kind of decks that just cannot really ever be a tier 1 deck for a long extended period of time because of the existence of super effective hate cards against it. Another cool reprint, we have Sylvan Safekeeper, a card I used to play in my Titania EDH decks back in the day. It's a 1-mana 1/1 human wizard, so I guess a wizard for Flame of Anor. Target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn after you sacrifice a land. So sacrifice a land, give target creature you control Shroud. When this card got spoiled today in my stream, people were talking about how this card was going to be really good in Yawgmoth to protect your Yawgmoth. But Wizards has played the long con. We finally found out why Yawgmoth has protection from humans. This is so that you cannot protect it with your Sylvan Safekeeper. Sylvan Safekeeper has morals, will not protect the villainous Yawgmoth. Could maybe pair it with Titania, Protector of Yawgmoth, and some brews. I've brewed around Titania and Zerorb a lot in Modern, and it's never really been very good, but this is something. It's also a 1-drop for Ranger Captain, which is something you need to think about. With 1-drops, it has an activated ability for Agatha's Soul Cauldron, so you need to think about that too, but fringe playable at best. I think I actually had Meltdown. Yeah, I think I had Meltdown on this slide. But ooh, a good card against artifacts. We can add it to the pile. This is even just a very short list of tools you can play to blow out Affinity and Scales and Hammer. The list just goes on and on and on, and I'm not even sure that this card is better than Shattering Spree, but it is going to be legal in the format. Okay. We also have a small upgrade to Silence. Strict upgrade, Orm's Chant is like Silence, 1 mana. Opponents can't cast spells, but if you kick it, creatures can't attack this turn. So it's like a split Silence Fog, which is pretty good. I like that this is being printed into Modern. Silence is a card I've played in some sideboards before, sometimes with like Eternal Witness Ephemerate loops to lock your opponent out of the game. Sometimes you'll play Silence in white decks that don't want to splash for blue to stop Cascade stuff. And this card is better than Silence. Silence is pretty fringe playable, and some people are talking about doing like the classic imprint an Orm's Chant to an Isochron Scepter, where you can cast it every single turn. But this kind of plan is just not good in a world where like it's just so easy to get like a Pithing Needle or Haywire Might off Urza Saga. It's so easy to channel a Beseiju. You have Leyline Binding. It's just so easy to break that kind of stuff up. So I don't expect this card to be much better than Silence, but it is a little bit better for sure. And this, to my knowledge, is all of the modern legal Modern Horizons 3 cards that have been officially spoiled. There have been some more leaked ones. I've only seen like one of them. I'm trying to stay away from them. I just kind of like to wait for the official spoilers. It's just so easy to get burned out with all the leaks and stuff, and try to keep on top of the new set that just came out. We just have Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and we have the leaks, and we have the Image 3 spoilers. It's too much. It's too much for me. I just like to keep up with the official spoilers. Overall impressions. I like that the design philosophy so far has seemed like powerful, interesting, cool cards that are good, but they have like pretty significant deck building restrictions, deck building requirements, which is exactly what I want to see. Exactly what I want to see. I feel like Modern Horizons 3 at the moment looks pretty promising. I think the flares are scary. I think these cards are kind of scary, and I think that Ugan's Labyrinth is kind of scary. But like, would it be a Modern Horizons set if you weren't like kind of scared of this stuff? Like Emrakul is pretty scary too. I don't know. It's okay. You gotta be hot and cold on set. You gotta be excited. You gotta wait till the next video to hear about the rest of the cards. Bye.